Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Aurora, then 26 years old, and Marc, then 32, decided to take their honeymoon to the stunning island of Corsica in the late spring of 1995. The girl had chosen this location for their first vacation together after Aurora and Marc got married 2 months prior. The young wife was eager to see Corsica's villages, mountains, and beautiful scenery. They made a stop in the quaint little town of Calvi that day. Here, a restaurant with a view of the bay hosted a candlelit dinner for the newlyweds in the harbor. Following dinner, Aurora and Marc made their way to the Notre Dame de la Serra Chapel, a well-liked tourist destination where lovers go to watch the sunset, the perfect location for a romantic day's end. Around 10:30 in the evening, they got into their car and drove back to the hotel. Right at the end of the railing, some animals abruptly leaped onto the road in front of the car, putting the young couple on a very dangerous road that descended sharply. The car plunged off the cliff as Marc swiftly turned the wheel. Aurora remained calm in spite of the dire circumstances. Before the car fell, she jumped out and opened the door. Marc was less fortunate. He and the car fell 140 meters. Aurora was alive, but she was in shock. In the middle of the night, in complete darkness, she bravely decided to go down barefoot to assist her husband. After locating Marc inside the vehicle, Aurora dragged him out. She washed his face and pulled him by the legs toward the sea. The girl then ascended the cliff once more in order to signal for assistance and stop a passing vehicle. Calvi firefighters showed up on the scene. Her husband was down there with a head injury and unconscious, and Aurora was screaming and sobbing in hysteria. In order to save him, she pleaded with the rescuers to descend as soon as possible. The firefighters immediately made their way to the cliff's base in an attempt to locate Marc, but their search was severely hampered by the night's darkness and the uneven ground. Just finding the car, which was empty, took them 30 minutes. But they saw that the man had a serious head injury and there was a lot of blood. When divers signaled that they had found something at 6 a.m., the weary firefighters were about to give up after hours of unrelenting searching. Marc's body was 3 meters deep in the water, floating next to the car. Unfortunately, it was too late for the newlyweds when they managed to bring his body to the surface. After compiling a report on yet another regrettable incident along that particular stretch of road, the police closed the case. The body of Marc was taken back to his home country of Belgium. The young widow was in complete despair. She spent several days in a specialized clinic after being unable to handle the grief on her own. As Marc's family hurried to comfort her, she proclaimed that she didn't want to see anyone and cut herself off from the outside world. Marc's family didn't press because they understood her mental state. She had lost her husband on their honeymoon when she was 26 years old. However, her actions captivated Marc's family more and more in the days that followed. Slowly, suspicion replaced concern. His parents strongly objected to Aurora's insistence that her husband be cremated. She left the farewell ceremony earlier than anticipated on the day of the funeral, shocking the family even more. The relationship between her and Marc's family has grown more complex ever since. When she got back to the family home, she changed the locks and refused to let her mother-in-law in, who had come to pick up some of her son's sentimental but cheap possessions. Aurora listed the house for sale in the weeks that followed. In addition to the EUR 25000 she received from the sale of the house, there was more. After her husband passed away, it was discovered that she had gotten 7 insurance payouts. Aurora was given EWAT 75000 in total. The Van Beers couple, who were shocked by their daughter-in-law's actions, took legal action and complained about the suspicious death. As a result, the coroner demanded that Marc's death circumstances be looked into. Investigators started by researching the couple's lives in order to comprehend what truly transpired that night. Marc Van Beers, 31, was employed at a reputable financial firm in Brussels in April 1994, about a year prior to the incident. Everything in his life seemed to be going well, or nearly so, and he had a great job, devoted parents, and amiable co-workers. But he had yet to find a woman he wanted to live a lifetime with. Marc wanted to start a family because he was old enough. In Brussels, Marc and Aurora met at a bar. Aurora was selling ironing boards door to door at the time, which wasn't a very lucrative job. There was immediate chemistry between Marc and Aurora. Marc was enamored with the attractive girl and fell in love with her right away. Their lively relationship left Marc's friends in awe and jealousy. Marc was shy, a little overweight, and uninterested in sports, whereas Aurora was very attractive, athletic, and fit. However, Aurora moved in with Marc a few weeks after they first met. Seeing that their son was content with her, the future husband's family embraced her as their future daughter-in-law and the mother of their grandchildren. When the young couple decided to tie the knot a year later, nobody was shocked. The girl asked Marc to put half of the house in her name, among other requirements for her future husband. Although this might have seemed strange or improper, Marc, who was incredibly in love, accepted all of the bride's demands. The young couple exchanged vows on March 11, 1995. Only the bride's twin sister was present from her side of the family, but the entire husband's family was present at the wedding. The husband's family gradually realized that their daughter-in-law avoided discussing her family and evasively responded to all inquiries about her background, education, and relatives. She acted as though she was from a wealthier family than theirs. More than a year after Marc's passing, on September 5, 1996, Aurora received an invitation to be questioned at the police station. She reaffirmed her earlier claims that she and Marc had gone to a chapel after dining at a portside restaurant. A wild animal unexpectedly leapt in front of their car on the way back. An unfortunate accident happened when Marc turned the steering wheel. Aurora opened the door and leaped out just before the car plunged off the cliff. No more information could be gleaned from her by the police. On October 8, 1996, Marc's body was exhumed in an effort to learn the truth. Some of the injuries were caused after death, according to the forensic expert. Although the body had many wounds, none of them were bleeding, suggesting that Marc passed away before the car plunged off the cliff. The widow was nowhere to be found when the police wanted to question her again. 2 years after the incident, the detectives made the decision to look into the crime scene in Corsica. The newlyweds' car plunged into the ravine, and Belgian police officers were at the edge of it. Armed only with photographs and without the car, the task became more difficult. However, the expert was able to reconstruct the car's pre-fall trajectory. A person's reaction to an unexpected event on the road, such as an animal running out, is to turn the steering wheel but not all the way around. Under no circumstances could the car have ended up where it was found if it had veered off the road and fallen into the water. The expert also observed another contradiction in the accident theory. When firefighters arrived on the scene, they reported that the bushes growing on the cliff's top had been crushed. The bushes would have been cut off if the car had sped down. It was clear from the crushed vegetation that the car had remained on the bushes for a while before descending gradually. Additionally, blood droplets were discovered unevenly distributed between the car and the water following the incident, indicating that the body was carried rather than dragged. Could an 80-kilogram man have been carried by Aurora, who weighed less than 50 kg? Aurora's version of events did not match the investigation's conclusions. The car was pushed off the cliff, according to the experts' conclusive findings. The investigators were now interested in learning what transpired following the incident. Did Aurora come down to assist Marc? Did she have the bravery and strength to go barefoot down the rocks? It was possible, as hard as it may seem to believe. Since Aurora Martin was a skilled athlete and a champion rock climber, the police found it difficult to deny that she had truly gone down to assist her husband. For them, it was a dead end. Since there was still no update on the young lady, the investigators made the decision to learn more about her past. Really, who is she? What secrets are concealed by her evasive responses? In actuality, the girl had a very challenging upbringing, devoid of both a loving family and a quality education. Her mother moved to Germany after her parents divorced when she was 12, so she hardly ever saw her daughter. Although her father was not very involved in her life, she led a carefree life with her 2 sisters. With lofty aspirations, the girl left her childhood home when she turned 18. Aurora entered beauty pageants in hopes of becoming a model, but was not very successful. She thus found employment as a bar hostess and occasionally as an escort service model. At the age of 24, Aurora made the most of her beauty and lived life to the fullest. In February 1993, she went to a rock climbing club one day as usual, where she met Peter Schwett, who would be her fateful encounter. He shared her love of mountaineering and was young, attractive, and wealthy. She was 24 years old and he was 23. At first sight, it was love. Aurora was able to move on from her previous life next to Peter. This tale sounded too good to be true. In fact, the investigators discovered an oddity while looking into Peter Schwett's past. He was a widower for a young man his age. The circumstances surrounding his wife's death were suspicious. 2 years earlier, on his 21st birthday, Peter was serving in the German army in Belgium. Peter liked going to clubs, and one night he met Ursula Davyy, a young student, while he was out with friends. They fell in love quickly, and 3 months later Peter proposed to her. Ursula soon learned, though, that Peter was not content with a single woman. Other surprises were in store for her. At their house, Ursula discovered counterfeit documents and substantial sums of money. She wanted to tell the police what she had discovered. Their young marriage became strained, and they made the decision to file for divorce. However, Peter was supposed to teach his wife how to drive, so he and Ursula got into a convertible and left on a trip on the evening of August 29, 1992. The outing was peculiar for soon-to-be ex-houses. Peter was behind the wheel and driving as fast as he always does. The car crashed into a canal at high speed after he lost control. Although Peter was able to flee in time, he was unable to save his wife, who perished in the water with the car. He remembered that even though he touched her hand, he was unable to grasp her and drag her to the surface. A few days later, Ursula's body was discovered. Nothing from the autopsy would raise any questions about the girl's drowning. Peter provided a convincing explanation of how he had gotten out of the car through the rear window when the police recreated the crime scene. However, Ursula's family never thought it was a sad accident. First of all, Peter had never lowered the top of a convertible before. Second, Ursula could swim very well. An expert who later examined the case claimed that Ursula had time to get out of the car because drowning takes 3 minutes or so as the water fills the car. The Belgian police, however, handled it as a regrettable mishap brought on by the driver's carelessness. The case was closed after the young widower received a sentence of 3 months in prison. Investigators couldn't help but notice coincidences between 2 scenarios, 2 crime scenes, and 2 cases. In both instances, a traffic accident occurred. The car ended up in the water after the driver lost control. While the other spouse's body was not discovered in the vehicle, one of the spouses was able to flee in time. Since Aurora and Peter were now the primary suspects in the murder of Marc Van Beers, detectives had an immediate need to locate them. Although investigators suspected Peter of Ursula's murder as well, it was possible to drop the possibility of charging him with the same crime again because Peter had already served 3 months in connection with that case. In the meantime, the police discovered the likely cause of Ursula's death and the reason Peter became so rich following the death of his wife. He was able to leave the army and woo the stunning Aurora after receiving an insurance payout of $1,500. After a year of romance, the young couple broke up in early 1994 for unspecified reasons. The girl registered with a marriage agency during this period. According to her, the perfect man would be well off, have a flat of his own, be amiable, and not be overweight. Her relationship with Marc Van Beers began in April 1994. The girl insured Marc in August 1994, 4 months after they first met. It's interesting to note that the documents had Aurora's signature rather than Marc's, indicating that he was obviously ignorant of this. She signed the paperwork on his behalf, claiming that his hand was hurt. Before long, a regrettable incident happened. After selling the house and getting the insurance money, Aurora vanished. She wasn't hidden for very long, though. Investigators discovered her trace in Luxembourg 2 months after Marc was murdered. She opened a bank account and deposited EUR 275,000 into it. She and someone named Peter Schwett were the only ones with access to the account. Had they gotten back together and relocated to Miami, Florida? Before, an article in a major French newspaper referred to them as diabolical lovers and detailed the police suspicions against them. The couple had been living a lavish lifestyle for nearly 2 years, complete with fancy apartments, cars, and a yacht. Peter and Aurora grew extremely wary. They only used telephone booths to make calls and altered their appearance. Before Peter was taken into custody in a supermarket parking lot, they were able to remain hidden for a while. He offered the police the roughly $50,000 he was carrying in exchange for their release, but they turned him down. Aurora was taken into custody by the police in the apartment where the lovers were hiding 2 days later. Aurora and Peter made every effort to evade extradition. Nevertheless, they were sent back to Belgium on December 3, 1998. Aurora declined to provide any testimony right away. In contrast, Peter talked a lot, but not much of it was accurate. The police had no hard evidence against them because they obviously did not want to cooperate with the investigation. An anonymous phone call altered the case's trajectory. Over the phone, a woman disclosed that she had information regarding Marc's murder. The woman was later identified by the police as Fabienne Lefevre. Aurora's stepmother, Fabienne, had recently split from the girl's father and made the decision to either get even or atone for her transgressions. According to Fabienne, she hurried to the hospital to console her stepdaughter following the tragedy in Corsica, but the girl who met her was entirely different, not even in mourning. Fabienne claims that Aurora told her everything. "It was all Peter's doing," she said, "and he handled everything." Peter and 3 accomplices, his German friends, pulled over Aurora and Marc as they were on the road. They used baseball bats to beat Marc. Fabienne claims that because Marc pleaded with the men to spare his wife and let her go, he was unaware of the betrayer until the very end. They loaded Marc's body into the car and pushed it off a cliff after the beating was finished. However, because it didn't fit Peter's personality, the police were unable to track down the accomplices or provide evidence of their existence. Furthermore, there were numerous questions regarding Fabienne's veracity. First, there was tension between Fabienne and Aurora. Second, why did she make an anonymous call? And why did she call the police sooner? She was afraid, the woman said. However, the police sought additional evidence because they were certain that Fabienne's words alone could not be used to build a strong case. Police in Germany discovered that one of Peter's brothers had postcards from Corsica and pictures of the car that crashed off the cliff. The interesting thing about these souvenir photos is that they were taken 6 months prior to Marc's murder. Was it deliberate planning or just a coincidence? 4 years had gone by since the murder, but the specifics of the crime were still unknown. The police made the decision to recreate the airport crime scene on June 16, 1999. The vehicle was being driven by the driver at a maximum speed of 35 kilometers per hour. As if attempting to leap out, Aurora was supposed to open the car door wide. Even when the car slowed down considerably, she didn't do it. In an attempt to find an explanation for her failure, she lost her temper, started crying, and had hysterical outbursts. Peter stepped in and tried to protect Aurora. Since, in theory, he was not present at the crime scene in Corsica, it is unclear why he was involved in the reconstruction at all. Following this experiment, the researchers were certain that Marc Van Beers was murdered rather than killed in an accident. The trial started. A revised version of events was put forth by the defendant's attorneys, who claimed that Marc had a heart attack shortly before he fell from a height. Put another way, since he passed away just seconds before the collision, all of his subsequent injuries were post-mortem. This hypothesis had the potential to disprove the prosecution's entire theory. Such a version did not match the autopsy results, but even the forensic expert thought it was a smart move. Another crucial detail that the forensic expert disclosed during the trial was that Marc had not eaten anything for several hours prior to the crime. He was starving. The juror's last straw was when Aurora even made up a story about having a romantic dinner with her husband that night. Both of them were convicted. Peter received a 20-year sentence, and Aurora received a 15-year sentence. They probably didn't even complete half of their sentences. They were made available a long time ago. As of 2021, they remained together even after Aurora was forbidden from leaving the country, and Peter was deported to Germany. Peter secured employment as a carpenter, and Aurora is employed due to her multilingualism. The most amazing aspect of this case is that Aurora and Peter committed 2 nearly flawless murders. If Aurora had been a little more patient and hadn't slammed the door in front of her husband's family, the second murder would have probably gone undetected. She would have quietly left after a few months if she had continued to be the kind girl they knew, and the Van Beers family would never have suspected her of anything. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Concerned drivers who had spotted an abandoned car on the highway started calling Thurston County, Washington police on August 31, 2022. Officers discovered that their worries were not unjustified when they got to the designated spot. The key was still in the ignition, the driver's side door was open, and the door and steering wheel were covered in dried blood. Beside the car, on the ground, was a broken phone. Whatever happened on the phone happened very quickly because it was last used at 5:10 p.m. and found at 5:30 p.m. The car was registered to Kenneth Davis from Olympia, Washington, which is 25 minutes away from the location where the car was found, according to the police's check of the registration number. But when they got in touch with Kenneth, they found out that the car had been taken by Gabriel Davis, Kenneth's 16-year-old son, at 4 p.m. Gabriel never returned from school after leaving for football practice. Blood and a smashed phone were clearly bad indicators. When such an incident occurs, a number of scenarios immediately spring to mind, such as a fight or perhaps even a murder. The police rushed to learn as much as they could about the boy. The 16-year-old Gabriel Davis hails from Olympia, Washington. His enthusiasm for football has not changed, despite a recent sharp decline in his academic performance. He never skipped a training session because he took it seriously. He was therefore immediately noticed when he failed to appear at the stadium on August 31st. No one knew where he was. Not even Justin Hume, his best friend. The police immediately began a thorough search after finding Gabriel's car, the broken phone, and the blood. Helicopters and search teams were involved in the ongoing search through the night and into the next morning. People who said they had seen the boy began calling in droves as word spread about his disappearance. The teenager was spotted strolling down the highway, according to 5 witnesses. He was walking toward the park by himself. Gabriel even responded to a caller who inquired about his well-being by saying, "Yes." The young man's mysterious disappearance was not the first or even the second incident in the county, which was the most horrifying part. Within 5 miles of where Gabriel's car was discovered, 2 other young boys had disappeared during the previous 6 years. Locals wanted the police to act right away because they believed he was the 3rd victim of the same kidnapper. Logan Schindelman and Matthew Anfelt were the names of the missing boys. Matthew and Logan played a lot of sports in their senior year, just like Gabriel did. There were notable parallels between the cases, especially in Logan's case. He had no reason to be in the southern part of the county, and his car was also discovered abandoned on the side of the road. Additionally, witnesses claimed to have seen the boys prior to their disappearances in both cases. But Logan and Matthew were never located. The FBI became involved early on because of these parallels and the urgency of Gabriel's investigation. The manager of North Carolina Power Systems, a company that specializes in diesel engine repairs, called the police while the massive search for the missing teen under mysterious circumstances was in progress. She stated that Daniel McCaw, one of their staff members, had not been showing up for work for 4 days and was not returning calls. She asked the officers to come to his house and see how he was doing because this was unusual for him, and he had never been missing before. When the officers got to his home in Orting, Washington, which is 45 minutes east of Olympia, they knocked on the door but got no answer. Through the doggy door, Daniel's German Shepherd dog ran outside. At the same time, they smelled a rotten smell, so they looked around for a way to get inside the house. An unlocked door to the laundry room allowed the officers entry. Daniel was lying on the floor when they got inside. He had been shot in the head and was lying in a pool of blood. At first, they thought he had committed suicide because there were no indications of forced entry. Nevertheless, no weapon was found close to the body, and a follow-up examination showed several stab wounds and an abdominal gunshot wound. The advanced state of decomposition made it difficult to determine the precise nature of the neck wounds. They discovered 2 empty holsters and casings for 9mm and .45 caliber firearms at the crime scene. Investigators came to the conclusion that the offender or offenders had used 2 distinct firearms, most likely taken from the victim. Only locals and the mailman had access to the man's elevated neighborhood residence, according to neighbors. How the offender could have muffled the gunshots was not immediately clear. It turned out, though, that although the locals were used to carrying guns, they did not meddle in one another's affairs. Even if someone heard something, they wouldn't think to call the police because they lived in relative isolation. During her talk with the police, Daniel's boss made a very intriguing comment. Daniel had split from Amanda Olafson, his fiancée, just 2 weeks prior. North Carolina Power Systems was another employer of Amanda's. Gabriel, her son, was the same Gabriel who had vanished the day before. It was an odd turn of events, and now the investigators had to figure out whether the murder of the 51-year-old man and the disappearance of the 16-year-old boy were related in any way. Thankfully, they could question Gabriel directly. On the evening of September 2nd, they located him in Thurston County, only 3 miles from the location of his car. Gabriel was found wearing only shorts, without a shirt, shoes, or even socks, and by himself in the dark in the woods. Gabriel said he didn't remember anything and didn't know where he had been when the detective asked him what had happened to him. The police found his response odd. Gabriel had no scratches, but his feet should have had some abrasions if he had been lost in the woods for 36 hours. The blood in his car also didn't match this. Gabriel didn't seem to be able to recall what had happened over the last 36 hours, possibly due to drug use. But in the end, the teenager's account was altered. He admitted that he broke the phone out of fear that the police would discover something that could be used against him. He went on to say that he was afraid of getting hurt, so he couldn't tell what had happened to him. This was a very strange and alarming statement, but since they couldn't force the boy to give an explanation, they let Gabriel return home to his family while detectives worked to determine what had happened. Kenneth, Gabriel's father, called the police the following day. He claimed that although his son did play a role in Daniel's death, it was only because Daniel's biker friends forced him to do so in order to steal something from the victim's safe. According to Kenneth, the biker gang approached his son because Gabriel had lived there and was familiar with the house's layout. If the boy didn't comply with their demands, they threatened to hurt him. Gabriel then confided in his friend Justin Hume about his problems, and the two came up with a solution. The police's evidence, however, painted an entirely different picture. Although the victim and the Amigos Motorcycle Club, which is connected to the infamous Bandidos Motorcycle Club, were connected, the police did not discover any proof that the Amigos Club was involved in the murder. In addition, one of Daniel's friends, who was also a club member, went to the victim's house a few hours after the body was found. When the detective told him about Daniel's passing, he was truly upset. Whatever was in the victim's safe, it had to be identified. When Daniel's mother gave the police the safe combination, she said that the contents would surprise and shock them. Amanda had called and told her that nobody knew how to open it, she said. Approximately 212 different kinds of weapons and ammunition, along with a few coins kept in plastic packets, were discovered by the detectives when they opened the safe. There were several packets containing illegally obtained pills and an empty jewelry box. There were details about his biker club in the notepad. There was obviously something the size of an ammunition box on the bottom shelf. Daniel took his safety very seriously, which was lucky for the investigators. He had a number of cameras in his home in addition to weapons. They assisted the police in figuring out what happened the night of the murder. The detectives discovered that Justin and Gabrielle spent a weekend getaway with their loved ones at Lake Panther on August 28. They left the campsite shortly after midnight and came back at about 6:30 a.m. The surveillance cameras at Daniel's house recorded their exact location, but their relatives were unaware of their whereabouts. 2 young, slender men came up to the victim's house from the backyard at 1:50 a.m. On his belt, one of them carried a canister of pepper spray or something. The men wore masks that partially obscured their faces. One of them had on a ski mask, the other a medical mask and a baseball cap. They had flashlights on hand. Through the dog door came the young men. After a while, nothing happened. But at 2:41 a.m., the homeowner left the garage, went inside, and vanished from the camera. 6 minutes later, his German Shepherd was seen on camera hastily leaving the house through the dog door. After leaving through the side door, the unidentified men wandered for a few minutes between the house and the garage while carrying what appeared to be a toolbox or a crate of military ammunition. At 2:52 a.m., they finally left the crime scene, bringing with them what appeared to be a toolbox or a military ammunition crate. Gabriel informed his father that Justin followed Daniel after he came inside from the garage, stabbed him, and then there was a gunshot. The safe was in the garage, so Gabriel went there. At that moment, he says he heard 2 gunshots. On August 29th, the guys went back to their regular lives after disposing of the weapons close to Daniel's house. Gabriel, though, vanished prior to the 31st. He claimed that after bikers found him, they dragged him from his vehicle and struck his head against the steering wheel, spilling blood inside. Then, after beating him for a while driving around with him in a Suburban, the kidnappers let him go. Additionally, they mysteriously took his shoes and shirt and looked through the car for the stolen item from the safe. They found nothing because he didn't steal anything. As a result, the teenager chose to portray himself as a victim, similar to Danielle. That being said, this version isn't cohesive. Why couldn't the teenager enter the house and flee right away if bikers were the ones forcing him to commit the crime? Why wasn't everything finished sooner if, as Kenneth claimed, they had planned it? It was illogical. Once more, why did they enter the house when the safe was in the garage if the goal was to steal something? In any case, Justin and Gabriel were searched and taken into custody by police on the evening of September 2. They discovered a black ski mask and a handheld flashlight in Justin's home, and a black mask in Gabriel's vehicle. Gabriel showed the investigators where he had thrown the weapons, close to the former Olympia Brewery in Tumwater, after the police arrested the teenagers on September the 2nd. Similar weapons to the one used to shoot the victim were found by the detectives: a .45 caliber Sig Sauer pistol and a 9mm Ruger handgun. More than a dozen knives were also discovered. The firearms were found inside an ammunition box, the same type that vanished from the victim's safe. Although Daniel had friends among the bikers, the police did not discover any indication that they planned to murder the man or even steal anything from his home. The real reason for the crime is not disclosed. However, Gabriel's past might conceal the crime's motivation. He has encountered numerous difficulties in spite of his youth. Gabriel and his older sister were at the center of a terrible custody battle that started when Gabriel's parents divorced when he was just 3 years old. A 2010 court ruling stated that the children lived with their father on weekends and with their mother during the week. After Amanda separated from an abusive husband and remarried twice, the decision was not reviewed. Kenneth, however, sued her after she moved in with Daniel in 2018, alleging that the kids' grades suffered and they frequently skipped class. Additionally, he claimed that Daniel was violent, threatened Gabriel with a weapon, and even threatened Gabriel's sister, who is now 20 years old, and her boyfriend. Daniel acknowledged yelling at the sister's boyfriend when he became embroiled in the custody dispute, but he denied threatening him. The argument started when the boyfriend broke into the house and took a phone charger, but he now feels bad about how he handled the matter. In any event, a judge in 2018 ordered that Gabriel, then 12 years old, and his sister, then 16 years old, live with their father during the week and with their mother on the weekends. The chaos didn't stop there. Because of her subpar grades, Gabriel's sister was expelled from school in January 2019. The girl reported to the school psychologist that her father had grabbed her wrist with force and that he acted aggressively, particularly when intoxicated. This only had a short-term impact. It is unclear if this was the case or if Amanda and Daniel pressured her to obtain full custody. The children were ultimately ordered to live with their father by the court. Amanda and Daniel's arguments served as the background for all of this. According to Daniel's boss, they may have broken up because of his devotion to the biker club. Amanda gave him a choice, either she or the club, refusing to make concessions to the club. His reaction is unknown, but neighbors noticed her removing items from his home on August 13, about 2 weeks prior to the murder. Gabriel made friends with Justin Hume during this period, who also had a history of getting into trouble at a young age. He was accused of making false bomb threats in high school and threatening a classmate with a knife in middle school. As a result, he had to transfer schools as soon as the academic year started. There are numerous pictures of the boy at the shooting range with Gabriel, demonstrating his intense interest in firearms. They caused mischief at school. Daniel's murder might have been retaliation for the way his relationship with Amanda ended, or maybe Amanda is lying. Anyhow, only a teenager could imagine a biker gang sending a kid to carry out their duties. The Raymond Hall Juvenile Detention Center is currently housing Gabriel and Justin. Among the many charges against them are first- and second-degree murder. Because of the high probability of them trying to flee, the bail amount for each teen is set at $1 million. When police arrived to arrest Gabriel, Justin's family was seen packing their belongings into a car, suggesting that they were probably planning to flee. Gabriel has previously staged a disappearance to avoid being held accountable for his actions. The teenagers will face adult trials. Notably, the Supreme Court in Washington decided in May 2021 that a person under the age of 21 cannot be automatically sentenced to life in prison without the chance of parole. Therefore, after serving 20 years, they might be eligible for release if found guilty. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. On a gray autumn day, a young Parisian girl, as usual, was returning home from school, hoping to remove her heavy backpack and grab a snack. However, as she approached her apartment building, she encountered a young girl who initiated a conversation with her. It took little effort for the girl to persuade the young girl to accompany her to her apartment. The schoolgirl probably didn't notice anything unusual about this because, after all, she was a petite girl, not an unfamiliar man whose mind could be filled with a variety of ideas. Furthermore, they were neighbors and lived in the same building. The girl followed her new acquaintance into the apartment, but as soon as she entered, the door slammed shut, and a nightmare began that is difficult to describe in words. Lola Davyy, 12, disappeared and was never seen again. The date was Friday, October 14, 2022. Johan and Delphine Davyy waited for their daughter Lola to return from school. The girl was aware that on Fridays the family would travel to their family cottage in Béthune, which was 3 hours away from Paris. As a result, she understood that she should not linger. Lola was an extremely obedient child who never went anywhere without permission. The school was only 200 meters from her house, so she should have arrived at any moment. So, when the clock went past 4 p.m., when their daughter didn't arrive, the parents knew something had happened. Johan and Delphine Davyy lived and worked in this building. It meant that Johan could check the surveillance cameras to see if his daughter had entered the building. To his surprise, the girl had arrived 45 minutes earlier, and she was not alone. She entered with a girl who the man did not recognize. The girl made a hand gesture, as if inviting Lola to accompany her. According to the video, the girl lacked confidence and the young woman appeared uneasy. The parents handed over the photo of the unknown girl to the police. Delphine also shared her photo on Facebook, stating that her daughter was missing. She described how the girl was dressed and said she was last seen with an unfamiliar young girl. The woman urged anyone with information to contact police or the Davyy family. Thousands of concerned citizens shared the post. People took to the streets to assist in the search for the girl. The search lasted several hours until 11:20 p.m., when a homeless man entered the inner courtyard of Lola's family home. Maybe he was looking for somewhere to sleep or something similar. Regardless, his focus was drawn to a large plastic suitcase. What he discovered inside the suitcase caused him to rush to find a police officer. Inside, the police found Lola's lifeless body. An autopsy revealed that the cause of death was asphyxia. In addition, she had a deep wound on her throat and bruises and cuts all over her body. The perpetrator bound Lola's hands and feet before placing her in the suitcase, leaving a strange final mark on her soles. The numbers 1 and 0 in red ink. The last person to see her alive was the girl who appeared alongside her on the surveillance cameras. But who was she? It didn't take long for the cops to find her, and when they did, their hair stood on end as they heard the chilling story of Lola's murder. The investigators decided to review the footage that the girl's father had begun watching an hour and a half after Lola returned home with the stranger. The same girl left the house. She changed into different clothes and carried a suitcase and 2 smaller wheeled bags. It was the same kind of suitcase that they later discovered Lola in. It became clear that the mysterious stranger was somehow involved in Lola's situation. The police decided to question potential witnesses to see if they knew where the girl went after she left the building. It turns out she had unsuccessfully asked passersby for assistance with the bags because they were heavy and she was struggling to handle them herself. Despite their usual friendliness and helpfulness, the French people did not help the girl. Perhaps it was because she appeared and acted strangely. Her makeup had smudged and she muttered something to herself. She eventually stopped by a cafe and purchased a croissant. Meanwhile, the suitcase stood in the middle of the street, and pedestrians were curious what was inside because, according to some witnesses, It smelled of chlorine and had some red stains. However, it was clear that no one could have predicted that there was a person's body inside. One witness, who proved to be a valuable resource for the police, also saw the girl enter the cafe. She approached him, asking if he could give her a ride. The girl offered him a reward for his assistance and explained that she needed to transport organs. In other words, she invited him to participate in an organ trafficking scheme. The man became scared and refused to give her a ride. However, he parked his car slightly behind her and watched what she did next. The girl appeared distraught and was speaking to herself. It seemed strange to him, so he kept watching. The car arrived at 6:30 p.m. The driver loaded the suitcase and bags into the trunk before driving away with the strange girl. It did not take long for the police to locate the car driver, Rashid N., a chauffeur for the VTC company. He confirmed that he knew the mysterious girl named Davyy bin Kayad, who was 24 years old, and that they had previously dated. Xavier called him and asked for assistance with her belongings. He arrived as requested and did not ask too many questions. Rashid drove Davyy to his home in All ASU Boys, a Paris suburb. There, the girl requested permission to do laundry and took a shower. She borrowed his clothes while her own were being washed. Around 10 p.m., they went out to eat and returned when Davyy was ready to go home. Rashid, on the other hand, stated that he had only brought her there and had no plans to return at the time. Nevertheless, he requested another VTC vehicle for her. The arriving taxi driver noticed the passengers' heavy suitcases and rushed to assist, but Rashid rudely refused and instructed him not to touch the luggage, either now or later. The girl got into the car, mentioned an address, and they drove off. When they arrived, without getting out of the car, the girl called someone. The conversation was held in a slightly raised tone. Davyy asked for assistance, but it was refused. It was later discovered that she had called her sister, who lived in the same apartment building as Lola's family. Davyy requested that her sister come down, let her into the house, and assist her in carrying the suitcase and bags up to the apartment. However, the sister, clearly aware of what Davyy represented, stated, "I will not help you. I don't want to know what's in those bags, so don't bring them here." Unable to come up with a solution, Davyy dragged the suitcase and bags into the house's inner courtyard and threw them there. She then called a friend and asked to spend the night at his place. After getting rid of the suitcase, Davyy appeared to calm down completely, and she and her friend spent an entirely ordinary evening laughing and having fun, as if nothing had happened. Davyy was arrested just 2 days after being captured on camera with Lola. The police tried to learn everything they could about the girl. She moved to France from Algeria 6 years ago with her mother and 2 sisters. In 2018, 2 years after moving, the police heard Davy's name, but as a victim of domestic violence. Her relatives and friends described her as deeply religious, and her ex-boyfriend even claimed that she was obsessed with the church. They did, however, explain that she changed after her father died while still in Algeria, and her mother died of cancer in 2020. Davyy was unable to cope with the loss and began talking to herself, becoming increasingly aggressive and unstable. However, it is known that she experienced fits of rage prior to her mother's death. She had a confrontation with the hospital administration in July 2019 when she was asked to pay for the medical treatment she received. Davyy became enraged and attacked the staff, claiming that she did not ask to be treated and should not have to pay for it. When she was escorted out of the building, she threatened to return, saying they had no idea what she was capable of. Despite her outburst of rage, the girl had no need to be taken to the police. When she was arrested in August 2022, the girl was no longer a student and had no right to remain in the country. However, because she had no criminal record, she was released and given a 30-day window to complete her paperwork or leave the country. But the girl did not do either. She simply vanished from the sight of the official authorities. She didn't work, didn't have a permanent home, and was officially homeless, despite having moved in with her sister. Her older sister admitted that Davyy had been exhibiting obvious mental issues for some time. She couldn't handle failure, and whenever she was told no, she would explode. However, Davyy refused treatment and her sister had no idea what else she could do. During the interrogation, Davyy admitted her guilt in the incident several times before retracting her statements. When the police showed her the footage of how they found Lola, she claimed she didn't feel hot or cold from it. She also stated that she had been mistreated and that her parents died before her eyes. She told the investigators that she lured Lola into her sister's apartment and forced her to undress and shower. The autopsy confirmed that Davyy assaulted her, tied her hands and legs, and taped her face with duct tape. As a result, Lola lost consciousness and eventually her life. Davyy went about her business as usual, drinking coffee and listening to music. Then, for unknown reasons, she slashed the lifeless body with either a knife or scissors. Later, Davyy abruptly retracted her statements, claiming that she would never commit such an act against a child, and accusing an unknown armed individual of the crime. She then revealed that she wasn't fighting Lola, but a ghost. Later, she returned to her initial confession, and it appears that the investigators were able to uncover an even more bizarre and inhumane motive for the crime. Davyy stated that shortly before the murder, she approached Lola's mother and addressed her as the building administrator where her sister lived. She requested an electronic card, a pass to the building, so that she could come and go whenever she wanted without having to ask her sister to let her in. Delphine had such authority because she did not live in the building but was a guest of her sister. Davyy, who refused to accept no for an answer, harbored resentment toward Delphine, and when she saw her daughter on the street, an exact replica of her mother, fury boiled inside her, and she resolved to seek vengeance. In other words, she committed the murder because, at the age of 24, she was not used to being denied and expected all of her wishes to be granted. Investigators believe that at some point, the attack moved from the apartment to the basement of the multi-story building, where they discovered clear signs of fighting. However, the police are still unfamiliar with certain aspects. Certain details, such as the numbers on Lola's legs and Davyy's admission that she drank her blood, suggest a ritualistic nature. In any case, the police confidently dismissed the black market organ trafficking theory. They see it as just another stroke in the accused's psychological profile. Davyy has been charged with murder, torture with violence, cruel treatment of a minor under the age of 15, and concealing a body, all of which carry a maximum sentence of 30 years in prison. However, it is possible that she was not acting alone. Initially, police arrested 5 more people. First and foremost, Davy's sister was arrested because everything occurred in her apartment and the basement of her home. However, the police later determined that she had no knowledge of the crime and was not at home at the time. The other 3 suspects were also released fairly quickly, and their names have not been revealed. Rashid, Davy's former boyfriend, 43, has been charged with concealing the corpse. The girl claims he is the mastermind of the crime. It doesn't help him that he turned down a taxi driver who offered to help Davyy with her suitcase. Those words also raise suspicions about the man. Did he know what was inside? He claims he didn't know what was in the suitcase, didn't open it, and had no idea what was inside. In the first week of November, a closed hearing was held in this case. The judge noted that the accused appeared completely calm at the time. The main question is whether Davy's crime was the result of a nervous breakdown or a desire to exact revenge on Delphine. If she is discovered to be mentally unstable, she will be treated by psychiatrists in a suitable specialized facility. If she is found competent to stand trial, she will be prosecuted. In early December, the psychiatrist who examined Davyy submitted his report to investigators. He described her as extremely dangerous but not mentally ill. In other words, while she is not completely stable, this does not render her insane or incapable of being held accountable for her crime. She is fully capable of admitting that her actions were terrible and illegal, and that she should be judged for them. Of course, Davy's lawyers will most likely request additional consultations with psychiatric specialists. The defendant is currently being held in solitary confinement at France's second-largest prison, Fresnes, which is located slightly east of Paris. According to media reports, she rarely goes for walks and prefers to watch TV. According to reports, whenever she sees herself on television, she expresses joy and does not conceal her pride in herself. Davyy had been living illegally in France for several months prior to the crime, so politicians used this story to bring up issues that were important to them. They quickly declared that France's anti-legal migration measures are deficient because migrants are responsible for many crimes in the country. In other words, if Davyy had been deported sooner, Lola would still be able to attend school, participate in gymnastics and figure skating, and spend time with her parents and older brothers. However, Lola's parents believe that politicians are using their daughter's tragic death to score political points. Johan and Delphine have decided that staying in Paris is too difficult, so they have left for Pas de Calais, where they originally came from. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. The only significant clue was a bite left by the attacker on the victim's body. It took the police over 20 years to discover the horrifying truth, but such a turn of events sparked outrage and criticism because no one expected such a result. Sherri Rasmussen was born on February 7, 1957 in the state of Washington. She grew up in a big, friendly family with 2 sisters and loving parents. They later moved to Tucson, Arizona, where Sherri attended the local school. Sherri was an excellent student who completed elementary school a year ahead of her peers. During her summer vacation, she completed the entire 7th grade program by herself. After graduating from high school in 1973, she enrolled at a California college where her older sister was already a first-year student. Sherri decided to pursue a medical education and become a nurse, which required her to complete additional courses at another institution. After graduating from college in 1975, Sherri decided to pursue a master's degree at the University of California, Los Angeles, where she also worked as a nurse to fund her education. She received her master's degree at the age of 23. Her father purchased an apartment in the Los Angeles suburbs for her, but Sherri refused to live on her parents' income, so she wrote her father a check every month for the full amount of the mortgage payments. She also got a job at a local hospital, where she led the nursing department that cared for seriously ill patients. In May 1984, Sherri met John Ruthin, a computer engineer with a good education and intelligence. They started dating and married a year later. John moved in to share their apartment. They spent their honeymoon in Jamaica and returned home to celebrate Christmas with Sherri's family. Closer to 10 a.m. John tried to reach her by phone, but she didn't answer. Half an hour later, he tried again, but still no answer, so he called her workplace to check if she had gone to work, but Sherri hadn't shown up at the hospital. Either her sister also tried to reach her, but without success. John returned home from work at around 6 p.m. and immediately noticed something strange. The garage door was open, even though he had closed it in the morning, and Sherri's car was missing. Therefore, he first thought that she had gone somewhere. As he approached the garage, he saw a lot of broken glass and immediately discovered its source. There was a small balcony above the garage with a glass door which had been smashed. He entered the house through the garage and to his horror found Sherri there. She was lying on the floor, her body badly disfigured. John immediately called the police, and detectives began to examine the crime scene. In all the rooms there was complete chaos. Broken vases, overturned furniture, and scattered items. A bloody handprint was found on the wall next to the alarm button. Apparently, the victim tried to reach it but failed. In addition to extensive bruises and wounds, experts discovered a human bite mark on Sherri's wrist. Aside from all of the foregoing, the marks on her hands indicated that the attacker had tied the victim before releasing her. The death was caused by 3 close-range gunshot wounds. Detectives discovered a blanket with bullet holes in the apartment and concluded that the attacker had wrapped the gun in it to muffle the sound of the shots. Detectives immediately concluded that the attacker and Sherri had engaged in a prolonged struggle. This was demonstrated by the number of scattered and broken items throughout the apartment, as well as a bloody near the alarm button. The lead investigator quickly stated that they were dealing with a failed robbery. In his opinion, at least 2 criminals broke into Sherri's apartment, but they didn't expect her to be there. A struggle ensued between them, and Sherri fought for her life until the end. Several facts supported the robbery version, the first of which was the disappearance of Sherri's car from the garage. Second, someone had placed the stereo equipment and player near the staircase leading to the 2nd floor. According to police, the robbers intended to take them and leave, but after the scuffle and murder, they fled the scene. However, there were some questionable scenes in this version. First, the police found no evidence of forced entry, implying that either Sherri let the criminals in herself or they had a key. Second, the perpetrators did not touch all of the valuable items, including the jewelry box that was in plain sight. Detectives interviewed all of Sherri's neighbors but found no new leads. Residents reported hearing a struggle but no gunshots, and no one entered the woman's apartment. Experts collected blood samples and fingerprints, but DNA analysis was not possible in 1985. The lead investigators soaked a piece of cotton in the trace of the bite on Sherri's body, hoping that the attacker's saliva could be left behind as a clue to catch the killer. Furthermore, he informed the police about the disappearance of the document. Detectives were unable to find an explanation for this unusual occurrence. After a week and a half, they discovered Sherri's car in a parking lot 4 kilometers from her apartment. It was unlocked, with the keys in the ignition. Forensic experts attempted to locate fingerprints, but were unsuccessful. Either the criminals only touched it while wearing gloves, or they removed all fingerprints. A robbery occurred 2 months after the murder, which took place just a few hundred meters from Sherri's home. Detectives immediately discovered numerous parallels. 2 criminals broke into a stranger's apartment through the garage, threatened the owner with a gun, and took stereo equipment. The lead investigator suspected that these 2 were responsible for the woman's murder, so the police searched for them through witness accounts. They made approximate composite sketches of the suspects and discovered that both men were Latino, but they were never found. However, investigators showed little interest in finding out the truth, which irritated Sherri's parents. Her father visited the police station on a regular basis, inquired about the investigation's status, and requested that the detectives consider various versions. He even asked them to look closer at John's ex-girlfriend Stephanie Lazarus, who was also a police officer. Sherri repeatedly told her father that she was obsessed with John, but the investigators laughed it off and told him to watch fewer detective shows. Stephanie couldn't accept John's departure after learning he was going to marry another woman. Stephanie came to Sherri's workplace and told her that their marriage was doomed and that she and John would get back together sooner or later. In addition, she claimed that John had already slept with her after getting engaged to Sherri. Of course, Sherri was very upset after this visit. When she returned home, she told John what had happened, and he admitted that he had slept with Stephanie. After learning of his engagement, the young woman begged him to come over, spoke of her love, and urged him to return to her. But he refused, saying he loved Sherri and planned to marry her. Stephanie then offered to sleep with him one last time, and John accepted. He apologized to Sherri and admitted it was a huge mistake on his part. The woman eventually forgave him, and the incident with Stephanie faded away. However, Stephanie continued to visit their home without warning under various pretexts. One time, she came with a set of skis and announced that John promised to wax them for her the next time she entered their apartment when the man was not present. Sherri was surprised to see Stephanie in her living room when asked what she was doing. Apparently, the woman used her police badge and the security letter to enter Stephanie's apartment otherwise. A duplicate key was required otherwise. She could not have entered without breaking the log. Sherri also noticed that someone was following her while she and John were sitting in a restaurant, and the woman saw someone staring at them intently. When she looked at this person, he immediately left. Sherri couldn't see his face because it was covered with a hood. Unknown calls also frequently arrived on their home phone, and Sherri suspected it could be Stephanie. The victim's father told detectives about all of these incidents, but they ignored his words because they were certain that the murder was committed by the 2 Mexicans who robbed an apartment near Sherri's house. 3 months after the murder, some documents from Sherri's case disappeared from the police station, including detectives' records of the investigation progress. The police were unable to locate the journals, but there were no significant leads. The case has remained unsolved for years. 7 years later, the lead investigator on the case retired, and the victim's father decided to meet with his replacement, hoping that he would take his job more seriously. Furthermore, it was 1993, and police were already actively using DNA analysis technology to solve crimes. Sherri's father requested a DNA analysis and offered to pay for it, but the detective declined due to the lack of a single suspect to compare the obtained profile to. Meanwhile, John started a new family and reunited with Stephanie. They planned to go to Hawaii together, but something unusual happened before that. The man called the detective and asked if they had any new evidence. Stephanie was a rising star in the police department, earning higher ranks, twice becoming Detective of the Year, and maintaining an impeccable reputation. Despite her marriage to another officer, she continued to sleep with John. In 2001, a separate unit was formed in Los Angeles to work on unsolved murders. They were assigned Sherri's case, along with thousands of similar cases, and the detectives began their investigation, left behind after a bite 2 years later. Detectives took up the case and sent all available evidence to the lab. Due to high demand, they had to wait nearly 2 years for the results, which came in January 2005. The evidence included nail fragments and blood samples from Sherri's apartment. Forensic scientists only needed to study the sample from the bite mark on her body. However, they couldn't find the vial for a day until they discovered it by the wall of a large refrigerator. After studying the sample, experts discovered foreign DNA belonging to an unknown woman. This lasted until February 2009, when a new detective took over Sherri's case and began studying the materials left by previous investigators. He questioned the robbery theory after discovering DNA from another woman near the victim's bite mark. Detectives reasoned that the motives for this crime could be very different, so they compiled a list of all the women who could be linked to Sherri's murder. As a result, they were able to collect 5 names, including Stephanie, the victim's work colleague, and 3 other young women. The detectives initially questioned Stephanie's involvement, citing her reputation and successful police career. For this reason, he decided to investigate the other suspects first. Together with other investigators, they quickly concluded that 3 women on this list had no connection to Sherri's death, they lacked motives, and had alibi. Following that, they began investigating the nurse who worked with Sherri. File stated that their relationship was tense, and the police obtained a sample of her DNA from the trash she threw away. Experts extracted the profile and discovered that it did not match the saliva found at the bite mark location, leaving the detectives with only 1 suspect. Stephanie and several colleagues agreed to keep this information secret until they could obtain solid evidence or disprove this theory. None of them wanted to accuse a police officer with an impeccable reputation of murder, and Stephanie could easily ruin their careers using her connections. They began secretly gathering information on her, trying to find any connection to the murder. Interestingly, the woman worked in the same building on the same floor as them. Because of this, the investigators had to take many precautions and not even mention her name in their notes. Soon, the detectives discovered the first interesting fact during the years of the murder. Stephanie owned a .38 caliber revolver, the same type of gun that was used to shoot Sherri. They also learned that the victim had repeatedly complained about strange and even aggressive behavior from Stephanie. The fact that the police officer came to Sherri's workplace in her uniform and said rude things to her seemed suspicious. Even more suspicion was added by the fact that Stephanie had broken into Sherri's gated community and even into her apartment several times. After analyzing the reports and photos from the crime scene, the detectives concluded that the possible robbery seemed staged. Nothing was taken from the apartment, not even the valuable items that were prominently displayed, but instead only a player and stereo were taken away. Moreover, the shooter had to be well versed in how the gun worked in extreme conditions. They were able to wrap the gun barrel with a blanket in such a way that the neighbors did not hear a single shot. It is unlikely that a low-level thief of players could possess such skills, but a trained and experienced police officer could. Another fact indicating Stephanie's involvement was a stolen marriage registration certificate found in her apartment. Why would some random burglars look for this document and take it with them, leaving a whole box of jewelry behind? But for Stephanie, it could have had significant symbolic value. Perhaps killing Sherri was not enough for her, or she had planned to break into her apartment only for this document, but the woman caught her in the act. In the end, the detectives learned that 2 weeks after the murder, Stephanie came to the police station and filed a report of theft. According to this information, someone had broken into her car, which was left near the pier, and stolen several items, including a sports bag, clothes, videotapes, and a .38 caliber revolver. Given all the facts presented, the moment with the gun seemed very suspicious. Detectives suspected that she intentionally got rid of the weapon, disguising it as a theft. Furthermore, she filed a report at a different police station where nobody knew her, which seemed very strange since her colleagues would have taken the case with the utmost responsibility. As a result, the detectives decided to obtain a DNA sample from Stephanie. Several officers undercover followed her for a week until they finally had the opportunity to get it. On May 28, 2009, Stephanie and her stepdaughter stopped at a cafe for a snack. As soon as they left, the officers took the glass she drank from and sent it to the lab. The next day, the result was ready, a full match. Despite the many factors pointing to Stephanie's involvement, the detectives were still shocked. It was hard for them to believe that a high-ranking and respected police officer was connected to the murder. but the DNA results were indisputable. However, at that moment, they did not have time for these thoughts and investigators began developing a plan to arrest her. None of them wanted to do this in the middle of the police station in front of hundreds of officers. Moreover, Stephanie had extensive connections, and the detectives decided to lure her away from prying eyes. The chief of the Los Angeles Police Department was unofficially informed that one of his subordinates was suspected of the murder. The chief ordered the detectives not to approach Stephanie while she had her service or personal weapon with her. The detectives considered arresting her in her home, which was risky because she lived with her husband and stepdaughter. They devised a plan to entice the person who outranked them to surrender their weapon. They found holding cells in the basement of the police department designed for temporary detention of criminals, where anyone entering had to surrender their weapon. This led to the creation of a legend saint. Stephanie went with them to the basement where the suspect was supposed to be held. After the woman surrendered her weapon, they went to the interrogation room, but there was no suspect there. The detectives gradually laid out the cards on the table and asked Stephanie questions about Sherri's murder. At first, they simply said that they needed to ask her a few questions about an old case related to her ex-boyfriend over the course. The detectives let her go, but at the end of the corridor, Stephanie was met by several police officers wearing handcuffs. 23 years after the murder, the woman was arrested. Given Stephanie's extensive police experience, all attempts to speak with her during interrogations yielded no results. She had a perfect understanding of the situation. There was DNA evidence against her found near the bite mark on the victim's body, which was extremely difficult to refute. Nevertheless, she denied any involvement and maintained her innocence. As a result, the detectives were forced to prepare documents for transfer to court over the next several years. Stephanie was housed in a women's prison until the first hearings began in 2012. It took the police 3 years to basically rebuild the case from the ground up because their predecessors believed in a failed robbery. It was necessary to redo all of the materials, focusing specifically on Stephanie. Throughout the trial, the woman insisted on her innocence. Stephanie's lawyer questioned the DNA test results and argued that there were no suspicions against her during the initial investigation. However, the prosecution believed that Stephanie entered Sherri's apartment and shot her once. Sherri resisted and a struggle ensued, eventually leading to Stephanie's death. The trial concluded on March 8, 2012, with Stephanie being found guilty of murder by the jury. She received a sentence of 27 years to life in prison, plus an additional 2 years for using a service weapon. The judge reduced her sentence by 1,000 days, citing her good behavior and time spent in custody awaiting trial. Sherri's parents attempted to sue the detectives who first worked on the case, despite the fact that the victim's father had instructed them to look into Stephanie from the start. They ignored his words. This begs the question, were they purposefully concealing their colleagues' involvement, or did they truly believe she was not involved? In the first case, it would have been a serious crime, whereas in the second case, it would have been simple negligence and disregard for significant facts. The statute of limitations expired in this case, so the court did not prosecute the police officers. Stephanie filed an appeal after the trial, but it was quickly rejected. She still denies her guilt and can only petition for early release in 2039. Sherri's ex-husband John lost interest in investigating her murder and began a new life. Please share your thoughts on this story in the comments section, and thank you for watching. A freshman at a prestigious university vanished without a trace after a sporting event, leaving her car and keys in the parking lot. The police did not investigate the case, believing that the young woman had simply fled, but her parents and friends were aware that something terrible had occurred. The mystery remained unsolved for 12 years, and it wasn't until the end that the truth was revealed. Shannon Melinda was born on October 20th, 1974, in Miami, USA, and her parents welcomed a second daughter, Monique, 5 years later. From a young age, the girls were taught that their first priority should be to obtain a good education. This approach had a significant impact on Shannon. She excelled academically from the start of her school career while also making time for various clubs and sections, where she outperformed her peers in every way. Shannon made it clear in high school that she wanted to pursue a career in politics or law. She led the school debate club and, in her final year, even gave speeches in the United States. Congress and the General Assembly of the United Nations are part of special training programs. Following these events, she decided she wanted to work for the Supreme Court. To achieve this goal, she required a solid legal education. Shannon submitted applications to several of the country's top universities. Given her perfect grades and extracurricular accomplishments, all universities and colleges were eager to accept her, but she chose Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. In addition to being one of the top 20 universities in the country, Emory offered her a $15,000 annual grant for the first 4 years of study, which covered the majority of her tuition. She moved to Atlanta after graduation to pursue a degree in political science. The university made a strong impression on her. She quickly adjusted and made many friends. Shannon was able to find a part-time job despite receiving the grant. A few kilometers from her dorm was a softball field that needed employees, and her responsibilities included keeping track of the game's score. Shannon was forced to quit her job on March 26, 1994, due to an error made by her supervisor. That morning, another employee was supposed to keep score, but Shannon was accidentally added to the roster and agreed to work the game. Shannon arrived at the stadium around 8:40, and her shift ended 4 hours later. Usually after work, the young woman would stop at a nearby gas station to get a soda. That day she also left, but no one saw her again. The stadium management had expected her to return after halftime to turn in her scorecard, but she never did. Her friend and roommate, Athena, was the first to sound the alarm. Shannon's absence from her dorm in the evening initially alarmed her. She had no other place to sleep and was unlikely to stay with anyone after not waiting for her roommate. The next morning, Athena decided to call Shannon's parents and see if they had heard from her in the previous 24 hours. Shannon's parents were at work at the time, so Monique, her younger sister, answered the phone. Monique informed Athena that she hadn't spoken with Shannon in a few days and promised to ask their parents when they returned home. Athena became increasingly concerned and told 2 mutual friends about Shannon's disappearance. They decided to look for her on their own. They got into their car and drove around campus. They eventually made it to Shannon's stadium, where they were met with a disturbing discovery. As they approached the stadium, they noticed a gas station nearby and were surprised to see Shannon's car. Her parents gave her a black Nissan 280SX as a gift. When they arrived at the gas station, they found the car empty, with the keys in the ignition and the doors unlocked. Shannon would never leave her car in such a state, which added to their anxiety. Her friends called the police because they suspected something terrible had happened. Unfortunately, the officers who arrived did not take the situation seriously. They took a quick look at the car and determined there was no evidence of a possible crime. Because there was no blood or signs of a struggle, the officers told the friends not to worry. They did not even collect fingerprints from the steering wheel or doors. Furthermore, they asked Athena to drive the car to the university parking lot, which she did. The officers spoke with the gas station attendants, who confirmed seeing Shannon around noon the previous day, but saw nothing suspicious. Shannon had most likely fled at the age of 19, according to the official police version. The case was not treated seriously. Shannon's parents decided to travel to Atlanta right away to join the search for their daughter. When they discovered that the police were unwilling to investigate, they did everything they could to change the situation, and their efforts were successful. Shannon was accepted into a non-profit organization by former President Jimmy Carter as a result of her connections after speaking in Congress. Shannon's parents had brought her disappearance to his attention. Carter and Senator Bob Graham secured FBI involvement in the case. Shannon's parents flew to Atlanta and started looking for their daughter. With the assistance of other students, they printed and distributed thousands of flyers about Shannon's disappearance. Later, her father rented a billboard and announced a $10,000 reward for any information leading to Shannon's location. The young female detectives identified several suspects among Shannon's acquaintances, but were quickly convinced of their innocence. 3 days after Shannon vanished, something interesting occurred. An unidentified man called the police hotline number listed on the flyers to report Shannon's appearance. He stated that the reporters made a mistake when reporting on the young woman's disappearance. Shannon was said to be wearing green shorts on the day she went missing, but they were actually blue. Furthermore, the caller stated that he had Shannon and would keep her as long as he wanted. Despite this distressing call, law enforcement continued to believe Shannon had simply fled somewhere. This assumption persisted for several days until April 6th, when an unidentified man made a second call. This time, he called the university's counseling center to inform them that Shannon was at his residence and was fine. He promised to call later and demand her return. Finally, he stated that he would leave Shannon's ring for the police near where he was calling to confirm his statements. This time, the FBI quickly traced the call and discovered that it originated from a payphone near a Burger King restaurant in suburban Atlanta. When detectives arrived at the location, they discovered the ring in a cloth baggie wrapped in duct tape. Shannon's parents confirmed that the ring belonged to her. This news brought them relief because it gave them hope of seeing their daughter alive again. Since then, they had been waiting for the perpetrator to call back and make his demands. This event prompted law enforcement to reclassify the disappearance case as a kidnapping. The police department appointed a new lead detective, who immediately pointed out his predecessor's lack of professionalism. He said that almost all of their actions were flawed. They did not take Shannon's fingerprints and instead asked a stranger to drive her car to another location. They also did little or nothing to investigate the case, believing that the young woman had simply run away and would return shortly. With this in mind, the investigators decided to rework every possible lead from scratch. The first thing they looked for was the softball field where Shannon was last seen the day she vanished. The fact that the young woman had been missing for several weeks added to the confusion. In addition, a championship game was held on the field that day, bringing the total number of visitors and participants to over 100. The detectives attempted to question as many people as possible, urging them to recall any suspicious incidents during the game. To their surprise, many people shared the same story. The only oddity in that game was the referee's behavior. According to the players and stadium staff, he was extremely dismissive of his job and was constantly distracted, even during important events. Instead of doing his job, he kept trying to talk to Shannon and ask her out. The referee's name was Calvin Hinton, but he preferred the nickname Butch. The 33-year-old man worked as a mechanic for Delta Airlines and refereed matches as a hobby. He had a wife, taught Sunday school at the church, and appeared harmless. The detectives dug deeper and discovered that Butch had left the softball field around the same time as Shannon. After speaking with his co-workers, they discovered another strange detail the day before the game. He had asked the other umpires to fill in for him because he was supposed to have a date. They were all aware that Butch was married, but he explained that his wife was out of town for a few days. When all of his co-workers said no, he called his boss and requested to leave the game early, explaining that his brother's wife was in the hospital and they had no one to leave the children with. Butch returned to the stadium 2 hours after leaving, still wearing his officiating uniform. He went into the locker room, changed, and then left. 3 hours later, he returned to the stadium and was spotted by a colleague. When asked what he was doing there, Butch explained that he had forgotten to deliver his paycheck to the accounting department, but he didn't have it with him. Furthermore, Butch asked his colleague if he had seen where his car was parked for a man who had just arrived at the stadium. That question seemed strange. Investigators questioned Butch, who denied any involvement in Shannon's disappearance. He said that after leaving the stadium, he went straight home. As proof, he showed detectives several outgoing phone calls made within 40 minutes of leaving the stadium. He agreed to a polygraph interview, but failed. Almost all of his answers were found to be false, but they were insufficient to warrant his arrest. It was, however, enough to obtain a search warrant for his home, which was conveniently located near the Burger King where the police discovered Shannon's ring. Detectives discovered 2 additional intriguing facts. His neighbors claimed he lit a fire in the early morning hours following Shannon's disappearance. Later, Butch called his father and requested a handsaw, claiming that a tree had fallen on his car. Detectives went to his house with their service dogs but found no evidence of Shannon's presence there. However, they noticed 3 areas with overgrown soil. When they dug them up, they discovered something extremely creepy. There were dozens of women's clothing and shoes beneath the ground, as well as a sleeping bag and softball field scorecards. Experts examined the excavated clothing, showed pictures to Shannon's parents, and determined that none of it belonged to the young woman. Butch admitted he had no idea where these items on his property came from. He assumed they were left by the previous owners of the house. In the end, the police were in a difficult situation. A number of facts pointed to Butch's involvement in Shannon's disappearance. but there was no direct evidence against him. They hoped that a more thorough examination of Shannon's vehicle would yield results, but they were out of luck. Because the police did not collect fingerprints or DNA samples on the first day of the investigation, the experts were unable to locate them. However, they came to an interesting conclusion: someone had thoroughly wiped down the car, erasing any potential traces. In an attempt to gather hard evidence against Butch, one of the detectives discovered an intriguing fact. He examined the bag containing Shannon's ring and discovered that such items are not made for retail sale. He contacted the manufacturer and discovered that Delta Airlines was the only buyer of such bags in Georgia. According to the company, mechanics used the bags to store small airplane parts. As we recall, Butch was a mechanic for that company. The detectives thoroughly examined everything and discovered another tiny clue. In Butch's car, they discovered a piece of the same duct tape used to wrap the pouch. On the tape itself, the experts discovered microscopic particles of the same metal. After analyzing its composition, they determined that this compound is only used in the aviation industry. Despite this, the case remained frozen for several months. The police and Shannon's parents were certain that Butch was responsible for the young woman's disappearance, but no one could prove it. All evidence was circumstantial. When the airline learned of the suspicions against him, they fired him immediately. Previously, he had managed to mockingly boast to his colleagues that he was a suspect in a kidnapping. After reviewing his background, investigators discovered Butch had a lengthy criminal history. They were unaware of this at the start of the investigation because advanced criminal databases did not exist in the 1990s. It turned out that he had committed his first crime while a minor. He worked part-time and one day went to his boss's house, where only his wife was present. Butch attempted to tie her up but failed. The woman persuaded him to leave by promising not to tell anyone, but she then called the police. Butch was arrested but, due to his age, was only ordered to receive involuntary psychiatric treatment, despite admitting to intending to abuse the woman. When he was in his 20s and married, he was arrested again for kidnapping a 14-year-old girl. He called his younger brother's ex-girlfriend and scheduled a meeting, assuring her that his brother would accompany him. However, he arrived alone and, claiming to have a gift from his brother, tied her hands and led her to his home, locking her in the basement. Butch's wife discovered the victim and contacted the police. The girl told investigators that Butch had molested her, but he only received a 4-year sentence. She also revealed disturbing information: Butch had threatened her with the same fate as 2 previous victims. Butch was released early, less than 2 years later, and remarried, his new wife unaware of his criminal history. The police suspected he had other victims whose remains were never discovered. Investigators were never able to charge Butch in Shannon's case, so they continued to search for evidence without success. Butch was released from prison in December 2003 after serving an 8.5-year sentence. During that time, police were unable to connect him to Shannon's kidnapping, but they struck lucky. Butch frequently hinted to his fellow inmates about his involvement in the case. Detectives interviewed about 10 inmates, and one, Adonis Cornwell, remembered Butch's late-night confession. Butch claimed that Shannon was killed by the demons inside him, not by him, and that her body would never be found because it had been scattered to the wind. This testimony, combined with previous circumstantial evidence, enabled investigators to take the case to trial. Butch was arrested in August 2004 and charged with kidnapping and murder. According to the investigation, Butch saw Shannon at a gas station and lured her into his car using false pretenses. He threatened her and drove to his home. He then returned to the stadium, parked Shannon's car at the gas station, left the keys in the ignition, wiped away the prints, and left. When he returned home, he most likely abused, killed, and disposed of Shannon's remains. Many questioned whether the court would convict Butch without a body. At the time, there had never been a case in Georgia where a person was convicted without a body. Investigators worked hard to get the most out of the circumstantial evidence. They even brought in inmates to testify on Butch's confessions. Despite this, Butch maintained his innocence. Following the trial, the jury was unable to decide. Butch was found guilty of murder after 3 days of deliberation. Consequently, the court sentenced him to life in prison. He was 43 years old at the time, and in theory he should have spent the rest of his life in prison. But there was one unsettling detail: the perpetrator was eligible for parole every 7 years under the statutes in effect at the time of the murder. Butch attempted to challenge the court's decision but was unsuccessful, and 2 years later, in 2006, something very unexpected happened. He decided to confess to the murder. His story was almost identical to the prosecution's. He saw Shannon in the parking lot and suggested she go to Burger King for a meal. Shannon agreed, so they drove there in his car. After lunch, they returned to the field, but Butch missed the right turn, came to a halt, and complained that his leg was cramping. He asked Shannon to drive and sat in the back seat. He pulled out a prepared knife and threatened to make the young woman drive to his house. He tied her up and told her he would not hurt her. Butch stated that all he wanted to do was sell her car and then let her go. She remained calm and did not attempt to scream or fight back. Butch returned to the stadium and drove Shannon's car to the gas station, leaving the keys inside. He did this in the hopes that someone would steal it, which would throw the cops off guard after thoroughly wiping the steering wheel and other areas where he might have left fingerprints. Butch returned home, abused the young woman, and then left for the movie theater with his nephews and their parents. Apparently, this family outing was planned as an alibi. When he returned home, he continued to abuse Shannon while repeatedly promising to let her go as soon as he sold her car. He then allegedly began to realize the gravity of his actions and attempted to figure out what to do next. He went to bed, awoke a few hours later, and began to panic. He then went down to Shannon's house, wrapped a tie around her neck, and strangled her. According to Butch, she was sleeping at the time, and everything happened quickly. Next, he spent hours debating what to do with the body. By morning, he had decided to burn it, so he started a large fire and added fuel before putting the body in. He changed his clothes and attended the church service. When he returned home, the fire had allegedly consumed all remains. The man claimed that the unbearable weight of guilt forced him to confess what he had done, but it was difficult to believe. First, he made 2 taunting phone calls to the police and the university, claiming Shannon was still alive after having already disposed of her body. Second, he intended to kidnap another woman, his wife's closest friend. That day, as soon as his wife left town, he called her and invited her over, claiming that he and his wife wanted to meet her, but the friend declined, saving her life. Knowing this, can we speak of Butch's remorse and guilt? In addition, he claimed that the fire reduced the body to ashes in a matter of hours, which appears impossible. The man stated that when he returned home from church, there was no trace of Shannon. He allegedly waited for the ashes to cool before gathering and dumping them on the railroad tracks. Most likely, he lied and needed to bury the remains, including the bones, somewhere. But why would he do this? Butch's only option was to realize he might never be released and play the remorse game. However, if he had pointed out where the body was buried, his sentence could have been altered, denying him the opportunity to petition for release. Despite the fact that experts discovered traces of fuel, he continued to insist that the fire in his house was caused by a broken vacuum. He is currently in prison, and his next petition for parole can be filed in 2025, when he will be 64 years old. Shannon's parents are still fighting to prevent his release. The only question that remains for investigators to this day is whose belongings were buried in Butch's backyard. Was he involved in the deaths of other young women? Possibly in the dozens? Please leave your thoughts on this story in the comments, and thank you for watching. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. In the suburbs of Manchester, Karen Spooner and John Lewis, their children Jane, Nicola, John, and Jamie, were a typical family. In 1997, everything was different. In Britain, May 5th was a holiday, therefore kids were exempt from attending school. 11-year-old John and 8-year-old Jamie, the family's youngest sons, were having fun in a nearby supermarket parking lot. They were great friends, even though they were 3 years apart in age. Despite their disagreements, John always looked out for Jamie. John was playing with pals that day when he failed to see his brother vanishing from view, but it didn't disturb him. An 8-year-old being bored and going home, or to see a friend, was not unusual. But his brother was still gone when John got home at around 6 o'clock. When the two brothers left the house at 8 a.m., Jamie had not been seen since. For Jamie, who enjoyed wandering the streets but frequently returned home to hug their mother or have a snack, It was highly unusual. Initially, no one was concerned, since they assumed the youngster was with his pals and had lost his sense of time. He was terrified of the dark, so they were sure he would return before dusk. However, Jaime's family went out into the street to look for the child when their father got home from work at around 8 o'clock in the evening. They went to every street where he liked to play, visited all of his pals, and called his name, but all they got was an echo. They went home exhausted and called the cops. Jaime was raised in the Manchester district of Openshaw, which is well known for its numerous shuttered factories from the mid-century. This implies that it is a somewhat dangerous but alluring area for a young adventurer to play. A number of worried residents joined the police search as they started looking through these structures. Karen asked anyone with information regarding her son's whereabouts, or who may have seen him, to call the police. The boy was short for his age of 8, she said, and he frequently wore clothes for children of 5 or 6. Jaime's family's anxiety drove them insane. How such a young youngster could go for his regular walk and not come home was beyond comprehension. As time went on and Jaime didn't show up, folks started to worry. Numerous calls and texts were sent to the police claiming to have seen Jaime in different locations throughout Manchester. However, all of these leads were later found to be untrue. A few days following Karen's public appeal, a man claiming to have seen Jaime's sibling approached Jaime's older sister. The girl nodded in agreement when he inquired as to whether the boy was dressed in a dark blue suit. The man was identified as 28-year-old bus driver Darren Vickers. He reported seeing Jaime on his bus to the police and his family. He clarified that the boy was able to travel all day on any bus in Manchester, since he had bought an all-day rider ticket. Darren's bus was the one Jaime had picked, and they rode it together all day from Ashton to Manchester on Route 219, looking out the window and getting off at the same stop where he had boarded. Because Jaime enjoyed automobiles, railroads, and buses like most boys his age, his parents thought it was their kid right away. He probably went to the bus stop to buy a gift for his mother's birthday at the store, but the bus trip distracted him. Darren Vickers gave off the impression of being a really nice guy who honestly wanted to help the missing boy's family. He volunteered to help Jaime's relatives if they needed it after visiting their house. He was invited to supper by Karen and John, who were astounded by his kindness and empathy. Jaime's family was going through a lot at this trying period. To assist in caring for her brother and sister, their 15-year-old daughter Nicola even dropped out of school. Darren sympathized with their predicament and offered assistance. By serving as their spokesperson, he attempted to lessen the load that had been placed on them. Speaking on the family's behalf, he encouraged anyone who may have seen the boy to call the police. He appeared to be a gift from God, and John and Karen had complete faith in him. On the other hand, the police did not fully believe that Darren Vickers was as amiable as he seemed. His story contained contradictions that made the investigators suspicious right away. First off, it was illegal to sell tickets to minors, so the boy could not have had the one that Darren claimed he had, allowing him to go all day on any bus in Manchester. Why then would the driver let Jaime accompany him for 6 hours? Out of compassion for a youngster who is enthralled with transportation, or for a worse motive? Other travelers on Route 219 also started calling the police. They claimed that Darren had misled them regarding Jaime's actions that day. Instead of spending the entire day sitting by the window, the child transformed the bus into his playground. Because Jaime was permitted to sit close to the driver, play with the controls, hand out tickets to passengers, and even use the gear lever, witnesses deduced that he must have been the driver's son or younger sibling. The detectives were certain that Darren had done something to win the child's trust. They discovered that Vickers had been lying to them from the start after watching the security camera tape. The camera at the bus stop captured Darren getting off the bus and going up to the boy. Before they boarded the bus, Darren even brushed the child's hair during their brief talk. In the evening, Jaime and Darren did not show up at the same bus stop. Prior to the youngster going missing, Darren had only been a bus driver for 2 weeks, the police found out. Darren had submitted bogus references on all of his prior employment applications, with the exception of one that belonged to a convicted felon with a history of targeting minors, according to more research into his background. The investigators invited Darren Vickers, who was a very nice person, to the station to be questioned when he unexpectedly became the main suspect. Unexpectedly, Jaime's family was incensed by this. They thought the cops were desperate, so they concentrated all of their attention on their new acquaintance, since they had no other suspicions. They waited for him outside during his time at the station, supporting him in the same way that he had always supported them. The detectives had to free Darren because they had no concrete evidence against him, and their investigation of his house turned up nothing. Jaime's family organized a party for him right away. Not only that, but Darren also moved in with them, taking up residence in Karen and John's bedroom while the parents, unable to find any rest, slept on the living room sofa. This was shocking and unbelievable to the police and many residents of the community who suspected that Darren was not who he claimed to be. The more he spoke to the media on behalf of the family, the less people thought he was innocent and sincere. Darren specifically gave himself away during interviews by repeatedly shaking his head and shrugging his shoulders when addressing reporters, according to body language and gesture expert Cliff Lansley. Because people make these tiny head motions without realizing it, and because they obviously contradict the statement they are conveying, they were a gift for a gesture master. In an attempt to restore control, Darren called a radio station and begged everyone to stop holding him responsible for the kidnapping of the boy. He said that because he lived close by, he offered Jaime a ride home in his own car after the boy had spent the entire day on his bus. This claim exposed more contradictions in his account. After all, he first stated that he had driven him to his grandmother's house after dropping him off at the same bus stop where he had picked him up. Darren seemed to have taken the child home now. The man's feigned affection and his desire to bring their kid home alive blinded the Lewis family, despite the fact that everyone could see through his falsehoods. He stayed with them all the time, going to locations where they might have seen the youngster and occasionally even taking the lead in the hunt. One of the cops even claimed that the family trusted him more than the police because of his peculiar behavior, which made their job much more difficult. Given that the police have a duty to tell the victim's family during the inquiry, Darren likely believed it was shrewd of him to try to persuade them to back him. However, it was not a good idea to be as open with the family as he wanted to seem when the police knew that the enemy was inside the family. They had to be separated by the investigators. Luckily, the police used Darren's traffic infractions as justification to put him in jail for 10 weeks in September. The investigators searched for any evidence against him during this period. They determined on October 14 that they had sufficient circumstantial evidence to accuse Darren of kidnapping the child. Even though they were certain that Jaime was dead, they were still unable to charge him with murder. Luckily, Darren's frequent TV appearances worked against him. 2 adolescents came to the police and told them a terrifying story about how a man who looked like Darren had attempted to kidnap them one night. After luring the kids to a quiet area of the neighborhood park, he showed them a picture of Jaime and yelled, "There he is! He was there, you see!" and tried to guide them deeper into the park. The children, however, were alarmed by the man's peculiar actions and were able to flee. The detectives shared their findings with Jaime's family. When Jaime's brother John told them a similar story, they were even more shocked. John held himself responsible for his younger brother's disappearance during this period. Darren became aware of this and began to show John more love by buying him gifts and supporting him all the time. But Darren took John to the park a few days after he moved in with the family, handed him a smoke, and said that his younger brother was there. However, John would wind up there himself if he spoke to anyone, and neither he nor Jaime would ever be seen again. John was frightened and startled by this confession, so he honored his oath and vowed to remain silent. It's interesting to note that the boy's older sister acknowledged that she was first uneasy about Darren's treatment of John. He obviously became attached to him, purchasing him a variety of things, such as a bicycle and pricey shoes, while utterly disregarding the older girls. Like the rest of the family, though, she soon came to feel that the man had been sent to support them at their darkest moments. The police and forensic specialists started searching the location that the teenagers had told them was where Darren had tried to lure them. Police found a jacket that matched Jaime's outfit and children's sports pants during the search. They discovered a piece of a jawbone when they took the garments to the lab for analysis and spread them out on the table to dry. According to experts who examined the bone, it was a human bone and belonged to a child between the ages of 7 and 9. The jawbone was identified as belonging to Jaime Lewis by subsequent DNA testing. Jaime's torso was eventually found in a secluded area of the park close to Stockport by the Reddish Vale Golf Course. A sizable percentage of the remains, nevertheless, were never located. The investigators came to the conclusion that Jaime was still alive when the murderer carried him to the spot, which was hard to get to. When Vickers gave his cellmate a different account, he was charged and in prison awaiting trial. He said Jaime was fatally struck after he fell and struck his head on a handrail in the bus. The bus driver threw him in the trunk and hurried him into the woods in a frenzy. The prosecutor, however, was certain that this account did not accurately reflect the events that took place. Even though it was challenging to pinpoint the exact cause of death due to the body's decomposition, Jaime's family's suffering persisted as the trial got underway. They were the targets of the murderer's horrible charges, in addition to being made to listen to what he had done to their son. Darren claimed to have a close relationship with Karen and that she was expecting his child. He also claimed that his father John killed Jaime. Even pictures of Darren and Karen touching hands were used as evidence by the defense lawyer. In order to show that Darren was lying and to stop the rumors that were spreading about her behind her back and creating repulsive graffiti on the walls, poor Karen had to submit to a DNA test. Darren Vickers was convicted guilty of kidnapping and murder by the jury following 7 weeks of trial proceedings. He was given a life sentence in jail with the chance of release after 25 years in April 1999. He unexpectedly asked to speak with the case's main investigator a day after the guilty verdict was handed down, and he admitted to killing, raping, abducting, and dismembering Jaime. According to the murderer's detailed account of the incident, Jaime called for his mother, but that didn't stop him from strangling him. He then made several trips back to the crime scene, most likely to dispose of the body pieces one at a time. Darren made this startling admission in the hopes of receiving a lighter sentence, but as his ruse backfired, he made a last-ditch effort to recover control by calling the media and taking back his confession. Another prisoner used a hammer to strike Darren in 2014. He suffered multiple severe head injuries. Despite spending some time in the hospital, the man recovered completely. In 2024, 3 years later, he is requesting a parole hearing. The police in the case pledged to do everything in their power to keep him from being released if the parole board determines that it is feasible. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. A teenage girl from Uruguay went missing on December 28, 2014. Because of the strange circumstances surrounding her disappearance, word spread quickly around the world. She didn't go missing late at night in a dangerous neighborhood. Instead, she was walking along the beach in broad daylight, visible to everyone. But it appeared that the ground had opened up and swallowed her. No one saw anything, no one knew anything, and a few days later her body was discovered in a location thoroughly searched by police, raising a slew of new questions. Lola Chomnalez was born on November 4, 1999 in Buenos Aires, Argentina. She grew up with Adriana Belmonte and Diego Chomnalez, the son of the well-known chef Beatriz Chomnalez. When the girl turned 15, her parents decided to give her a trip to New York for the Christmas holidays. However, before that they sent their daughter to Rocha, Uruguay, to relax with her godmother's family for a few days. On December 27, Lola arrived in Uruguay, where she was greeted by her godmother, Claudia Fernandez. Claudia's photo captured the girl in a good mood. Claudia, her husband Hernan Zincunegui, and their 2 children were delighted when Lola arrived. They had intended to spend their few days together sunbathing on Barra de Valisas beach, swimming in the sea, and relaxing. That same evening, Lola, Hernan, and his 14-year-old stepson went to a drum festival in the city center. Hernan and the boy stayed by Lola's side in the crowd, but the boy eventually moved away because he was bored. Nonetheless, after the festival, they all returned home together. The following day, the family went to the beach. Lola requested permission to walk along the beach from her godmother around 3 p.m. She wanted to walk to Aguas Dulces, a spa resort, along a popular trail that would allow her to explore the area's flora and fauna. Claudia had no objections because the route was popular and safe for walks, and the locals were known for being friendly. She informed Lola of the time they would be waiting for her at home and watched her walk away calmly along the beach. Lola was wearing a bikini and denim shorts. She carried a backpack containing a sarong, a book, her ID, a water bottle, and a towel. She didn't have her phone with her because the reception on the beach was poor. The backpack also included a wallet containing 2,000 Uruguayan pesos. Several hours passed, it became dark, and Lola had not returned. Her godmother became worried. The family followed the route Lola had planned, but she was nowhere to be found. Claudia called Lola's parents that evening to explain what had occurred. She informed Adriana that she had already called the police. However, it took 45 minutes for them to arrive at the station and report the teenager's disappearance. The police began searching for Lola. Since she vanished during a walk on the beach, it was thoroughly searched both lengthwise and crosswise. Helicopters and search dogs were dispatched to assist with the search. Lola's parents quickly arrived in Uruguay to assist the police. Almost simultaneously with the start of the investigation, it was revealed that Adriana and Diego were receiving anonymous calls. The caller made no demands or asked for a ransom. They simply stated that Lola was with them and was fine. Unfortunately, this turned out to be incorrect. 2 days later, on December 30, her body was discovered partially covered in sand on the beach. She was in an area with a lot of dunes and thick vegetation. There were shallow knife cuts on her neck and signs of head trauma. The autopsy revealed that Lola was attacked from behind and then dragged or forced to the spot where she was discovered. The killer pressed her face into the sand until she suffocated. This was proven by the presence of sand in her lungs. The news of the crime sparked an unprecedented outcry in Argentina and Uruguay's press. As is customary in such cases, journalists began to propose theories about what could have happened. The Uruguayan police and media quickly focused their suspicions on Lola's godmother's family, particularly Hernan. There were various reasons for this. To begin, they told Adriana and Diego that they had already contacted the police, despite the fact that they had delayed their arrival at the station. Second, the media attempted to read something sinister into the fact that Lola, Hernan, and his 14-year-old stepson attended a drum festival together, but the boy eventually separated from them, leaving the girl with Hernan. A hypothesis regarding violence against Lola emerged, but the forensic expert discovered no evidence to support it. However, there were other reasons to suspect them. Claudia and Hernan immediately hired a lawyer, and none of the family members agreed to a polygraph test. Lola's parents fueled the fire with a series of bold statements. Diego in particular stated that he had long since lost trust in Hernan, which prompted additional questions. If he didn't trust the man, why did he let his daughter accompany them on their vacation? Claudia and Adriana had been friends for 25 years. Claudia's second husband was Hernan, whom Lola's parents had known for about 5 years. They all used to live in Argentina, but Hernan and Claudia moved to Uruguay. When Hernan was interrogated, investigators discovered contradictory statements, leading to his arrest on December 31. Diego was arrested for allegedly concealing evidence. Her son was also detained because he was suspected of making the anonymous calls. It is not certain who made the calls to Adriana and Diego, but it is clear that they were a failed attempt at a joke. Nonetheless, the police interrogated all 3 family members for several days and found no evidence against them. The investigators stated that they discovered some discrepancies in the testimonies, but they were minor. Hernan claimed they arrived home at 11 p.m., but his son said it was 12. Aside from that, there was nothing the police could charge Hernan, Claudia, or her son with. Therefore, on January 2, 2015, they were all released. The friendship appears to have deteriorated as a result of several public statements. Claudia and her loved ones never spoke to Lola's parents again or called to express their condolences. Adriana thinks their lawyer may have given them such advice. However, she believes that as friends, a simple human gesture would have been to call and express condolences, particularly given their 25-year friendship. Lola's pink backpack was discovered a few days after her death. It was also buried in the sand, about 200 meters from where Lola's body was discovered. This immediately prompted a slew of questions. How did the police not find the body and then the backpack despite searching the entire beach and its surroundings several times? Furthermore, the town's authorities had claimed from the start that the beach was very safe, which was strange because drug dealers operated there, particularly in the area where the body was discovered. Nonetheless, almost all of the girl's belongings were still in the backpack, with the exception of 2,000 pesos stolen from her wallet. Furthermore, there were bloodstains on the towel and the documents. Forensic experts examined the items and discovered Lola's DNA, but it was mixed with male DNA. Because Hernan's suspicions had not been completely dispelled, his DNA was compared to the one dispelled. It was compared to the one discovered. They also checked it against the Uruguayan police database, but there were no matches. Following the discovery of the backpack, one suspect created quite a stir. He was suspected based on witness accounts of his whereabouts on the day of the murder. According to locals, a man nicknamed El Conejo, the Rabbit, was working on a roof near the beach when the girl went for a walk. The man went to lunch in the middle of the day, and his co-workers were aware that he did not have any money with him. However, he came back with food and money. This immediately prompted the question of where he obtained the food, if he did not buy it. But that's not all. Someone claims to have seen him with a pink backpack on the day Lola went missing. According to one newspaper, he confessed to the murder, and other media outlets reported on the development. However, this turned out to be false. The man explained where he got the food, but police suspected he stole it from beachgoers. There was no evidence linking him to Lola's case. He never admitted to anything, and after being released, he filed a lawsuit against newspapers that published unverified information. The investigation had effectively stalled at this point. The primary suspects had already been released, and the investigators had no leads to follow. At first glance, it appeared that the girl knew no one in town, but she had managed to attend a drum festival in the city center and, being sociable and open, freely interacted with strangers. As a result, the police were compelled to investigate this lead. They detained and interrogated approximately 40 people, primarily beach vendors and dealers, but all were eventually released. The situation was aggravated further by the frequent changes in prosecutors and judges. When a new prosecutor was appointed, the case would be reviewed from the beginning. This severely hampered the investigation. But on February 18, 2015, there appeared to be some progress in the case. An anonymous call was made to police. The caller claimed that Angel Moreira, also known as El Cachila or Keisha, was involved in the crime. The man was arrested and interrogated by the police. He worked on the beach parking cars. Angel said he met Lola while she was walking on the beach. He approached her with some souvenir trinkets for sale. They spoke briefly about where the girl came from. When Lola mentioned feeling dizzy, Angel suggested they move to a shady area. He took her to a location with tall bushes and dunes for shade and coolness. The girl fell to her knees. Angel attempted to check her pulse but became scared when unable to hear it and fled. The statement sounded strange, but the police had to release him because there was no evidence. After 4 years, Jorge Basso, the new prosecutor in charge of the case, decided to re-interrogate Angel. The man was arrested following the interrogation on May 22, 2019. This time he was charged with obstruction of justice. His DNA did not match the DNA found on Lola's towel and documents, so the prosecutor concluded that he was covering up for the true perpetrator. According to Basso, Angel's 2015 statements revealed details that only Lola's companions would have known. He knew Lola had fallen to her knees in the sand, and a forensic expert confirmed this. Lola fell, however, not because she felt dizzy, but because she had received shallow knife wounds. Despite Angel's arrest, the Chomnalez family waited for an answer to the main question for years, until geneticist Natalia Sandberg became involved in the case. 7 years after the murder, the case took an important turn. The investigator's method of discovering the suspect is reminiscent of a detective novel plot. Natalia Sandberg had the idea to trace the genetic DNA of an unknown man discovered on Lola's towel and documents. There were no matches in the paternal line, but an examination of the maternal line revealed a minor match with a prisoner serving time for murder. In other words, the man who left blood on Lola's towel is related to the man who is currently serving a sentence. The third crime, which involved Marines who died in the naval complex on Faro de Montevideo, was the tip of the iceberg that led investigators to Lola Chomnalez's true killer. The murders happened on Sunday morning, May 31, 2020, and the three people, Juan Manuel Escobar, Alex Galinia, and Alan Rodriguez, were found with gunshot wounds to the head. Jonathan Brand Gundy was identified as the killer by police. Jonathan was born in Rocha. When the police discovered his mother and tested her DNA, it was clear that they were looking for another son of the woman, Jonathan's half-brother. The woman told the investigators that she had given birth to 11 children from various fathers, 8 of whom were boys, but only one son was placed for adoption at the age of 18 days. He turned out to be the person the police had been looking for 7 years. The suspect was identified as Leonardo Sena. During Lola's murder in 2014, Sena was homeless, dividing his time between La Paloma, Chuy, and Castillos. He lived in these places, working odd jobs. He recently settled in Chuy, where he lives with a girlfriend and works in a bakery. Between 2003 and 2009, the man had a history of police records for aggression, theft, and violence. Despite his involvement with the law, his DNA was not stored in the database because it was created after 2012. As a result, on May 18, 2022, the police issued a search warrant for his home. They expected the man to refuse to provide his DNA, and they were correct. However, forensic experts looked at the man's toothbrush and comb. To the surprise and delight of the forensic experts, the DNA match was 99.9%, indicating that it was his DNA. The suspect was arrested at the Brazilian border on May 19th. During the interrogation, Leonardo claimed he had no involvement in the crime. Regarding the DNA found on the identification card and the girl's towel, he stated that he found a pink backpack on the beach. When he looked inside, he saw a wallet containing 2,000 pesos and stole it. Concerning the blood, he stated that he had cut himself with a bottle shard at work a few hours prior, and when he reached into the backpack, the bandage came off and the cuts began bleeding. So he wiped his hand on Lola's towel. However, there were several inconsistencies in his account. For starters, his blood was mixed with the girl's blood rather than simply found on her belongings. This would not have happened if he had simply found the backpack and removed the wallet. Second, according to his own words, someone other than Leonardo took Lola's backpack on the 28th, the day of the murder, after Leonardo stole the money and mysteriously buried it 4 kilometers away from where it was found, without taking anything from it. Even the suspect couldn't deny the absurdity of the story. Finally, his colleagues from December 2014 did not recall the incident involving the broken bottle and Leonardo's cut. Furthermore, according to documents, Leonardo was no longer working at the brewery on the day of the crime. According to police, Lola was stopped by Leonardo and Angel while walking on the beach on December 28, 2014. They dragged her through dunes and bushes. Lola attempted to flee, but the kidnappers struck her on the head several times and stabbed her in the neck, knocking her to her knees. However, Lola's wounds were not fatal and she resisted. She most likely screamed loudly to get the attention of other vacationers or beach vendors. In an attempt to silence Lola, they pressed her face into the sand. They pushed for too long, causing Lola to suffocate. The police believe the crime was motivated by violence, but the assailants were unable to carry out their intended act and ended up killing her because they did not anticipate such fierce resistance from the teenage girl. This hypothesis is supported by the fact that Leonardo was previously tried in a case similar to Lola's. That happened in 2009. When Leonardo was 26 years old, the victim was a 15-year-old girl, just like Lola. Leonardo pursued her for a few blocks before attacking her with a knife. He dragged the victim into a remote wooded area where he assaulted her. Uruguayan police believe that at least 2 people were involved in the attack on Lola. As a result, they charged Leonardo with aggravated murder and Angel with harboring a criminal. Jorge Basso sought a 10-year prison sentence for Angel and 15 for 30 years for Leonardo. A judge granted Angel conditional early release under oath in June 2021, after he had been in prison since 2019. Despite psychiatric and psychological evaluations describing Angel as aggressive and impulsive, the judge found no grounds to accuse him of harboring a criminal. Harboring involves assisting a criminal after the crime has been committed. Angel should have faced charges as an accomplice in this case. The judge determined that Angel Moreira's actions did not constitute harboring. The prosecutor filed an appeal against the judge's decision, arguing that Angel was present before, during, and after the crime. Despite their initial suspicions, Lola's parents, Adriana and Diego, believe the evidence presented by the police agree that 2 suspects were involved in the crime and wish for a quick verdict. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.